The crystal champagne flute shattered in my grip, sending shards across the marble floor of my own dining room. Silence fell over the birthday gathering as all eyes turned to me, but I barely noticed the sting of the cut on my palm. All I could focus on was the satisfied smirk on Vivian's face as she finished her latest verbal assault. My name is Adeline, and this was supposed to be my 35th birthday celebration. Instead, it became yet another stage for my mother-in-law's favorite performance. Let's remind everyone how inadequate Adeline is. Oh dear, do be careful with the crystal. Some of us know how to handle fine things, Vivian said, adjusting her pearl necklace. Though I suppose we can't all have that natural grace, can we? I watched a drop of blood fall from my palm to the floor. My husband, Forrest, predictably, became intensely interested in his phone screen. Here, let me help you with that. Livia, my best friend, appeared at my side with a napkin, wrapping it around my hand. Her eyes met mine with silent support. Really, Adeline, Vivian continued, addressing the room more than me. I told Forrest he should have let me plan this party. The catering is adequate, I suppose. But these plates? From Target. At least you tried, dear. The plates were hand-painted Italian ceramic, but I didn't bother correcting her. I'd learned long ago that facts were irrelevant in Vivian's world. Actually, I picked those plates. Trinity, my coworker, spoke up from across the room. They're from that little boutique in Milan, the one featured in Architectural Digest last month. Vivian's smile tightened. Well, they certainly look mass-produced. Randolph, my business partner, cleared his throat. Speaking of production, Adeline, didn't you just close that major deal with— Oh, please, Vivian interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. Let's not discuss business at a social gathering. It's so nouveau riche. She turned to Forrest. Darling, remember when I threw your 35th? Now that was a party. The governor attended, remember? I excused myself to the kitchen, clutching the bloody napkin. Livia followed, closing the door behind us. I swear to God, Adeline, one of these days I'm going to— Don't, I cut her off, running my hand under cold water. It's not worth it. The hell it's not. Did you see Forrest just sitting there, while his mother— I saw. My voice was steadier than I felt. I always see. The kitchen door swung open, and Trinity slipped in, followed by Randolph. Your mother-in-law is currently explaining to everyone how you clearly couldn't afford proper lighting for the dining room, Trinity reported, which is hilarious, considering you literally designed the lighting system for half the high-rises downtown. You can't keep letting her do this, Randolph said quietly. You're one of the most successful architects in the city. You've won awards. You're about to— I know. I dried my hands, straightening my shoulders. Trust me, I know. The door opened again, and Forrest poked his head in. Mother's wondering where everyone went. The cake. Of course, I replied, my voice honey-sweet. We wouldn't want to keep your mother waiting. Back in the dining room, Vivian had positioned herself at the head of the table, my seat. As the staff brought out the cake, she began regaling everyone with stories about Forrest's childhood, pointedly excluding me from every anecdote. I watched her hold court, saw how she'd orchestrated the entire evening to remind me of my place in her hierarchy, watched my husband of 10 years pretend not to notice, felt the weight of every slight, every dismissal, every carefully crafted insult she'd delivered over the years. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the way the cut on my palm throbbed. Maybe it was catching Vivian's reflection in the window, preening as she commanded everyone's attention. Or maybe it was simply time. Actually, I said, standing up, I'm not feeling well. I think we should end the evening here. Vivian's eyes gleamed with triumph. Oh dear, not handling your wine well. I did try to teach you about proper portions. I met her gaze steadily. Thank you all for coming, especially you, Vivian. You've made this evening unforgettable. As guests began gathering their things, I caught snippets of Vivian's stage whispers. Poor dear, never could handle hosting. And Forrest deserves someone more capable. I stood at the door, accepting hugs and goodbyes, the cut on my palm, a constant reminder. Livia squeezed my arm as she left, Trinity and Randolph both giving me meaningful looks. Later, as I lay in bed, listening to Forrest apologize for his mother being herself, I made a decision. This would be the last birthday where Vivian Anderson made me feel small. I had something coming that would change everything. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. The morning after my disastrous birthday party, I sat in my office, staring at the email that would change everything. The board's decision was unanimous. I would be the new CEO of Anderson and Steele Architecture, effective immediately. You haven't told Forrest yet, have you? Randolph leaned against my door frame, 2 coffee cups in hand. I shook my head, accepting the coffee he offered. He thinks I'm still just the creative director. Actually, he thinks I'm playing at being creative director. Your husband seriously doesn't know you own 40% of the company. Vivienne convinced him years ago that my position here was a courtesy appointment. I took a sip of coffee, remembering that conversation. She told everyone at the country club I was the office decorator. Randolph's laugh was sharp. The office decorator who designed the new performing arts center and just landed the international airport contract. My phone buzzed, a message from Vivienne. Darling, I've taken the liberty of scheduling you for etiquette refresher courses. Last night was quite embarrassing. Delete it, Randolph advised, watching my face darken. Focus on what's coming. Speaking of which, I pulled up my calendar. The International Architecture Awards Gala is in 3 weeks, where you'll be announced as both CEO and recipient of the Innovation in Sustainable Design Award. Randolph grinned. Have you decided how you're going to play it? Before I could answer, Louisa, my assistant, rushed in. Adeline, your mother-in-law is in the lobby. She's insisting on taking you to lunch to discuss your behavior. Perfect timing, I said, standing up. Send her up. Randolph raised an eyebrow. You sure? Trust me. 5 minutes later, Vivian swept into my office like she owned it, designer handbag swinging. Really, Adeline, that display last night was unacceptable. What will people think? About what specifically, Vivienne? I remained seated, watching her search for the most commanding position in the room. Your emotional outburst, the broken glass, leaving your own party early. I've always said Forrest needed someone more stable. Stable, I repeated, thinking of the contract paper in my desk drawer. Like the foundation of a building. She waved her hand dismissively. Don't try to talk business, dear. It doesn't suit you. Now, about these etiquette classes. I have a better idea, I interrupted, pressing the intercom. Louisa, could you bring in the Thompson portfolio? Louisa appeared with the blueprints for our latest project, a sustainable luxury hotel that had made headlines. What's this? Vivian asked, irritation creeping into her voice. The Thompson Hotel project. You mentioned it at the country club last month. Said it was a shame your son's company had lost the bid to some upstart firm. Her perfectly lined lips tightened. Well, yes, it was quite disappointing for Forrest. Except Anderson and Steele won that bid. I spread the plans across my desk. My design, my pitch, my project. Don't be ridiculous. Forrest would have told me. Forrest doesn't know. I met her eyes. Just like he doesn't know about the airport contract, or the Performing Arts Center, or the 40% ownership stake I have in this company. The color drained from her face. You're lying. The International Architecture Awards Gala is in 3 weeks. You should come. Bring Forrest. I'm sure you'll both find it educational. She stood abruptly. I don't know what game you're playing. No games, Vivian. Just business. I smiled. Which, as you've pointed out, I know nothing about. After she stormed out, Randolph reappeared. That was bold. She won't tell Forrest, I said, gathering the blueprints. Her pride won't let her admit she was wrong about me. She'll come to the gala expecting to prove me a liar. And instead, she'll watch me accept my award and CEO position in front of every major player in the industry. I paused. Including the governor she's so proud of knowing. Trinity poked her head in. Was that the dragon lady I saw leaving? She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. More like the first taste of her own medicine, Randolph said. My phone buzzed again. Livia, this time. Lunch. Need to hear about the aftermath of last night. Go, Randolph urged. You've earned a break. We'll finish the gala preparations tomorrow. As I gathered my things, Trinity asked, Are you sure you want to wait 3 weeks? You could just tell Forrest tonight. I thought about all the dinner parties where Vivian had belittled me. All the times Forrest had looked away. All the years of carefully constructed humiliation. Some lessons, I said, are better learned in public. Walking to meet Livia, I felt lighter than I had in years. The cut on my palm had scabbed over, but I pressed it gently, remembering, sometimes you need to bleed a little before you can heal properly. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served under spotlights, with an audience, and a standing ovation. The invitations have to be perfect, I told Louisa, watching her sort through sample cards, especially the one for Vivienne. Gold embossing, heavy cardstock, and just pretentious enough to make her feel special. Louisa held up an elegant cream-colored invitation. Exactly. She needs to think this is Forrest's moment. We were in my office after hours, finalizing details for the gala. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reminding me of all the nights I'd spent here building my career while Vivian assumed I was getting manicures or shopping. Speaking of Forrest, Louisa said carefully, he called earlier, asked about your late nights at the office. What did you tell him? That you're working on a special project, which isn't a lie. My phone lit up with a text from Forrest. Mother's worried about you, says you're acting erratic. Dinner at her house tomorrow. Erratic, I muttered, showing Louisa the message. 3 weeks of focusing on work instead of attending her charity luncheons. And suddenly I'm erratic. Mrs. Anderson did stop by reception twice this week, Louisa revealed, trying to get information about your schedule. Before I could respond, Trinity burst into the office. We have a situation. Vivienne was just at LeBlanc. LeBlanc was where all the society wives had their weekly gossip sessions, disguised as lunch. And, I asked, though I already knew it wouldn't be good. She was telling everyone you're having some sort of breakdown. Said you've been making wild claims about your position here, that you're embarrassing Forrest. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course she is. That's not all, Trinity continued. She's been calling board members' wives, trying to dig up dirt on you. Let her dig, I said, turning to my computer. Louisa, send out the invitations tomorrow. Trinity, make sure the press releases are ready to go the morning after the gala. Already done, Louisa confirmed. Though I did have to promise the governor's office 3 separate interviews to guarantee his attendance. Perfect. Vivian would never miss a chance to network with him. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Randolph. Turn on Channel 7 News, now. Trinity grabbed the remote, and we watched as the evening news covered a story about the Thompson Hotel project. The reporter was interviewing someone I recognized, one of Vivienne's closest friends. Concerns about the project's leadership, the woman was saying. Sources say the firm may not be as stable as they claim. That witch, Trinity breathed. She's trying to sabotage the project. I picked up my phone, dialing Randolph. Tell me you're handling this. Already on it. I've got statements from our major investors ready to go. And the Thompson family is willing to do an interview tomorrow, confirming their confidence in us. Good. And Randolph, make sure they specifically mention who designed their hotel. After hanging up, I turned to find both Louisa and Trinity staring at me. What? Are you sure you want to keep waiting? Trinity asked. She's escalating. That's exactly why we wait, I said, pulling up the gala seating chart. She's getting sloppy, making mistakes. By the time the gala arrives, she'll have shown everyone exactly who she is. Louisa's phone chimed. The venue manager needs final numbers for the seating arrangements. Put Vivian at table 1, I instructed. Front and center. I want her to have the perfect view when everything falls apart. Trinity leaned over my shoulder, studying the chart. You're seating her with the governor's wife, bold, and the wives of every board member she's been calling. Let them see her reaction up close. My phone lit up with another text from Forrest. Made reservations at Mother's Club for Friday. She wants to discuss your behavior. You're not going, are you? Trinity asked, reading the message. Oh, I'm going. I smiled. In fact, I'm going to be perfectly pleasant. Let her think she's winning. Louisa started gathering the invitation samples. Should I cancel your actual Friday meetings? No need. I'll have lunch with Vivienne, then head straight to the airport to sign the international contract. She can spend the afternoon telling everyone how I waste my time while I'm literally expanding the company globally. A knock at the door made us all look up. It was the cleaning lady, looking apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but there was a woman here earlier asking questions about Ms. Adeline's schedule. She said she was family. Let me guess, I said. Elegant, perfectly coiffed, wearing pearls? The cleaner nodded. Next time, tell her I'm in a very important meeting. Don't specify what kind. I turned to Trinity and Louisa. Vivian's getting desperate. She knows something's coming, but she can't figure out what. 3 weeks, Trinity said. 3 weeks, I confirmed, looking out at the city I was helping build, one design at a time. And then we'll see who's really erratic. Trinity cornered me in the office kitchen 2 weeks before the gala, her face unusually serious. We need to talk, now. She practically dragged me into the conference room, closing the door behind us. I was at La Maison last night. La Maison was Vivienne's favorite restaurant, where she held court with her social circle every Wednesday. And Forrest was there, with her. Trinity's hands were shaking slightly. You need to hear what I recorded. She pulled out her phone, and Vivienne's distinctive voice filled the room. Really, darling, I've been saying for years she's not suitable. Remember that lovely girl I introduced you to last summer? The one from the right family? Mother, please. Forrest's voice, tired but not disagreeing. Adeline's been acting strange lately. But strange? She's delusional, claiming she's some sort of executive here. I spoke with Margaret, and she assured me the board would never allow such a thing. We need to consider having her evaluated. I'm sure it won't come to that. Of course it will, and when it does, we'll make sure everyone knows it was for her own good. The divorce will be much cleaner that way. The recording ended. I sat very still, my hands flat on the conference table. There's more, Trinity said quietly. They're planning something for the gala. I couldn't hear exactly what, but Vivienne kept mentioning making sure you're exposed properly. Did you tell anyone else about this? Just Randolph. He's pulling together contingency plans for. The door opened, and Forrest walked in. Trinity and I froze. Adeline, your assistant said you were in here. He looked between us. Everything okay? Fine, I said smoothly. Just reviewing some presentations. Did you need something? Mother wants to know if you're free for tea tomorrow. She's concerned about you. I bet she is, I thought. Actually, I have a client meeting tomorrow. Very important. You've been saying that a lot lately. He frowned. Mother thinks. I'm sure she does. I stood up. Tell her I'm sorry to miss tea. I'm sure she can find someone else to critique for an afternoon. That's not fair, Adeline. She's trying to help. Trinity made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Was there anything else? I asked. Some of us have work to do. After he left, Trinity turned to me. You're still not going to tell him about the CEO position? No, let him find out with everyone else. I meant about the recording, about his mother plotting your downfall over crème brûlée. I gathered my papers. He wouldn't believe it. He never has. Back in my office, Randolph was waiting. Trinity told you. I nodded. We should move up the announcement, he said, before Vivienne can. No, we stick to the plan, but, I smiled slightly. Maybe we add some insurance. I pressed the intercom. Louisa, get me the governor's office, and then call Livia. Tell her I need her PR expertise. That evening, I arrived home to find Forrest in the living room, looking troubled. Mother says you've been spreading rumors about the company, he said without preamble, that you're causing problems with investors. Interesting. I poured myself a glass of wine. And what do you think? I think you've been working too hard. Maybe you should take a break, let someone else handle things for a while. Someone your mother approves of. He sighed. Why do you always make everything about her? My phone buzzed. A message from Livia. Press release drafted. Governor's wife confirmed for pre-gala interview. You're going to love this. You're right, I told Forrest. Let's not talk about your mother. Let's talk about the gala instead. You are coming, aren't you? Mother says it's important for appearances. Of course she does, I thought. Good. It's going to be quite memorable. Later that night, I received another text, this time from Trinity. Vivian's been calling board members again, trying to suggest you're unstable, unfit for leadership. I replied, perfect, let her dig her own grave. Then I called Randolph. Move Margaret to Vivian's table at the gala. The board member's wife, who's been feeding her false information. Exactly. I want them to have front row seats to each other's humiliation. You're scary sometimes, you know that. I learned from the best, I said, thinking of all Vivian's careful social manipulations over the years, the students about to surpass the teacher. After hanging up, I stood at my home office window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Vivian was probably plotting my professional demise over expensive wine, while Forrest nodded along, convinced he was being supportive by staying neutral. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until everything changed. Let them plot. Let them scheme. Let them think they know what's coming. They had no idea. You need to see this, Livia announced, bursting into my office with her laptop. Someone sent me an email from an anonymous account 1 week before the gala, and the tension was building. I gestured for her to sit. It's a series of emails between Vivian and several board members' wives, Livia continued, turning the screen toward me. Dating back months, she's been systematically trying to undermine you. I scanned the emails, my jaw tightening. She told them I was sleeping with clients to get contracts. Keep reading. The emails got worse. Vivian had crafted an elaborate narrative about my supposed mental instability, suggesting I was embezzling company funds to support a gambling addiction. She'd even hinted that my recent erratic behavior might be drug-related. Who sent this to you? I asked. Margaret. Livia smiled. Apparently, she's been playing double agent, recording conversations, saving emails. She's got videos of Vivian at social events, openly plotting to have you removed from the company. Trinity appeared in the doorway. The governor's wife is here for the pre-gala interview. Perfect timing. I stood, straightening my jacket. Livia, get those emails to our legal team. Trinity, make sure the photographer gets good shots of me with the governor's wife. The interview took place in our main conference room, overlooking the city. Mrs. Bradford, the governor's wife, was surprisingly warm. I've been following your work for years, she said, as the photographer set up. That performing arts center design was brilliant. Funny, I replied. Vivienne Anderson told me you found it garish and nouveau riche. Mrs. Bradford's eyebrows shot up. Did she? Interesting, considering I specifically praised it at the last charity board meeting. She was there. She does seem to have trouble remembering certain things, I said diplomatically. After the interview, Randolph pulled me aside. We've got another problem. Vivienne has been calling our major clients, trying to warn them about my supposed instability. Worse, she's telling them the company is about to undergo major leadership changes, suggesting they might want to delay any pending contracts. My phone buzzed. Forrest. Mother wants us both for dinner tonight. Says it's important. Go, Randolph advised, reading the message over my shoulder. Keep her thinking she's in control. Vivian's house was exactly what you'd expect. A showcase of old money and careful curation. That evening, she'd set an elaborate table for 3. Darling, she greeted me with air kisses. You look tired. Those late nights at the office must be so draining. Actually, I feel great. I took my seat. The gala preparations are coming along beautifully. About that, she poured wine with practiced grace. I've been hearing concerning things. Perhaps it would be better if you didn't attend. Forrest shifted uncomfortably. Mother. No, darling, this needs to be said. Adeline, your recent behavior has been troubling, making grandiose claims about your position, spreading rumors. What claims specifically concern you, Vivienne? She waved her hand dismissively. This fantasy about being some sort of executive. Really, dear, it's embarrassing. My phone buzzed again. A message from Louisa. Final seating chart approved. Press confirmed. Governor's office sent over his speech. He specifically mentions your achievements. You know what's interesting? I said, putting my phone away. How hard you've worked to keep me small. All these years, every slight, every dismissal, every carefully orchestrated humiliation. The color drained from Vivienne's face. I don't know what The emails were particularly creative. Drug addiction, gambling. You must have stayed up nights crafting those stories. Forrest looked between us, confused. What emails? Nothing you need to worry about, darling. Vivienne said quickly. Adeline is clearly what? I stood up. Unstable? Delusional. Better be careful with those accusations, Vivienne. They might come back to haunt you. Is that a threat? No. I smiled. It's a preview. See you at the gala. Outside, Forrest caught up to me. Adeline, wait. What's really going on? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks. You know, for years I wondered why you never defended me. Now I realize you're just like her, so convinced of your own superiority that you can't see what's right in front of you. What's that supposed to mean? Come to the gala, I said, getting into my car. Find out. As I drove away, my phone lit up with messages from Trinity, Livia, and Randolph, all confirming different pieces falling into place. 1 week, 7 days, until Vivienne's carefully constructed world came crashing down. And this time, I wouldn't be the one picking up the pieces. The Grand Plaza Ballroom glittered with 1,000 lights, each one reflecting off the crystal chandeliers I'd specifically chosen for tonight. Guests in formal wear mingled, champagne flowed, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Vivienne just arrived, Livia reported through my earpiece. She's wearing red. Of course she was. She always wore red when she wanted to be the center of attention. Everything's set, I asked, adjusting my black designer gown. Press is in position, Governor's on his way, and… Livia paused. Margaret just texted. She has the video ready. I watched from the mezzanine as Vivienne made her entrance, Forrest trailing behind her. She headed straight for the Governor's wife, already playing her social games. Ready? Randolph appeared beside me. Born ready. We descended the grand staircase together, and I felt Vivienne's eyes lock onto us immediately. She was probably wondering why I looked so confident, why I was entering with one of the firm's founding partners. Adeline, she air-kissed my cheeks. Darling, you really should have consulted me about the seating arrangements. There seemed to be some unfortunate mix-ups. No mix-ups, I assured her. Everyone is exactly where they should be. Forrest approached, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. The Governor's asking for you. Is he? Vivienne preened. Well, we shouldn't keep him waiting. He's asking for Adeline, Forrest clarified. The flash of anger in Vivienne's eyes was quick but unmistakable. Well, I'm sure he'd like to see us all. Before she could maneuver her way into the conversation, Trinity appeared. Adeline, the press needs you for photos. With the Governor. I could feel Vivienne following as I made my way through the crowd, trying to insert herself into the moment. The Governor greeted me warmly. There's our woman of the hour, he boomed. My wife hasn't stopped talking about your interview. Vivienne pushed forward. Oh, Governor, you remember me. We met at the… Later, please, his aide interrupted. Photos first. I posed with the Governor while Vivienne seethed in the background. Cameras flashed, capturing what would become tomorrow's business section headlines. Speech time in 10 minutes, Louisa whispered as she passed by. I made my way to my seat, noting with satisfaction that Vivienne was positioned perfectly, close enough to see everything, but not part of the main action. What's going on? Forrest asked, taking his assigned seat beside his mother. Why is everyone treating this like it's your event? Because it is, I replied simply. The Governor took the podium, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we're here tonight to celebrate excellence in architecture and design. But more than that, we're here to recognize a visionary leader." I saw Vivian lean forward, probably assuming he meant Forrest. "Someone who has transformed our city's skyline, who has brought sustainable design to the forefront of modern architecture. Someone who, as of today, becomes the youngest CEO in her field." The color drained from Vivian's face. "Please join me in congratulating Adeline, not only on her appointment as CEO of Anderson & Steele Architecture, but also as this year's recipient of the International Innovation in Sustainable Design Award." The room erupted in applause. I stood, making my way to the podium, as Vivian grabbed Forrest's arm. "This is ridiculous," I heard her hiss. "Do something." But there was nothing he could do. The screens around the ballroom lit up with images of my projects, my achievements, my journey to this moment. "Thank you, Governor," I began. "This is an incredible honor." From my position at the podium, I could see everything. Margaret smirking at Vivian, the board members nodding approvingly, the press furiously taking notes. "Architecture isn't just about buildings," I continued. "It's about foundation, structure, truth." I paused, meeting Vivian's eyes. "Sometimes, people try to undermine that foundation. They spread rumors, create false narratives, attempt to destroy what others have built." The screen switched to display emails. Vivian's emails, her careful campaign of destruction, laid bare for all to see. "But a well-built structure can withstand any attack," I said, as gasps and murmurs filled the room. "As long as its foundation is solid." Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Forrest sat frozen, finally seeing the truth he'd ignored for so long. "To everyone who supported me, who believed in my vision, thank you." I raised my glass. "And to those who doubted, who tried to tear me down." I smiled directly at Vivienne. "Thank you too. You taught me exactly what kind of leader I don't want to be." The applause was deafening, but I barely heard it. I was too focused on Vivian's face as her carefully constructed social empire began to crumble. And this was only the beginning of the evening. The chaos that erupted after my speech was exactly what I'd anticipated. Vivian stood at her table, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the back of her chair as her social circle physically distanced themselves from her. "This is slander," she announced to anyone who would listen. "I'll sue." "With what evidence?" Margaret asked sweetly, holding up her phone. "I have recordings of every conversation where you plotted against Adeline. Would you like me to play them?" Forrest finally found his voice. "Adeline, what is all this?" "Your mother's been busy," I said, approaching their table. "Want to hear her plans for my psychiatric evaluation? Or maybe the rumors she spread about drug addiction?" The gambling stories were particularly creative. "Mother?" Forrest turned to Vivienne. "What is she talking about?" "She's lying." Vivienne's voice rose shrilly. "She's manipulating everyone, just like she manipulated her way into this position." Trinity stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Actually, we have the board's unanimous vote recorded, along with documentation of every project Adeline has led over the past 5 years. Would you like to see the revenue figures?" The governor's wife approached, her face stern. "Vivian, I think it's best if you step down from the hospital board. We can't have someone who engages in character assassination representing our charity." "But I've been on that board for 20 years. Vivian's carefully crafted facade began to crack. "Yes," Mrs. Bradford replied. 20 years of taking credit for other people's work, just like you tried to do with Adeline's achievements." More people were gathering now, years of Vivian's victims, finally finding their voice. "Remember when she said my catering business was quaint?" One woman said. "Then tried to steal my contracts. She told my husband I was having an affair with my business partner." Another added. "Nearly ruined my marriage." Forrest stood up, looking lost. "I don't understand." "Mother, these people are telling the truth," I finished for him. "Just like I've been trying to tell you for years." You ungrateful little. Vivian lunged forward, but Randolph stepped between us. Security, he called calmly. I believe Mrs. Anderson needs some air. As two discreet security guards approached, Vivian played her final card. Forrest, are you going to let them treat your mother this way? But Forrest was staring at the screens, still displaying evidence of his mother's campaign against me. All those times you said Adeline was imagining things. I did it for you. Vivian's mascara was starting to run. She was never good enough for you, never good enough for our family. Good enough? I laughed. I built half the buildings in this city's skyline. I turned this company's profits around. I won international awards. The only thing I wasn't good enough for was your ego. Please escort Mrs. Anderson out, Randolph instructed security, and make sure the press gets her statement about suing us. I'm sure they'll be very interested in discovery. As Vivian was led away, still protesting, the governor approached. Impressive handling of a difficult situation, he said. Your new sustainable city project proposal. I'd like to discuss it over lunch next week. Of course, Governor, my assistant will set it up. The party gradually returned to normal, though the buzz was decidedly different now. I watched as Vivian's former friends huddled in groups, probably realizing they needed to realign their social allegiances. Adeline. Forrest touched my arm. I don't know what to say. That's not surprising, I replied. You haven't known what to say for 10 years. I never knew she was doing all this. You thought I was overreacting, imagining things, being difficult. I turned to face him fully. Tell me, what's your excuse for all the times you saw her behavior firsthand and did nothing? He had no answer. That's what I thought. I gestured to Louisa, who appeared with a manila envelope. These are divorce papers. Your mother was right about one thing. Our marriage is over. Just not for the reasons she planned. You can't be serious. Actually, I've never been more serious. I handed him the envelope. I designed my life, just like I designed my buildings, with careful planning, strong foundations, and no room for toxic structures. As he stood there, envelope in hand, looking as lost as I'd ever seen him, I felt nothing but relief. Enjoy the rest of the party, I said. I have a city to build. I walked away to where my real support system waited. Trinity, Livia, Randolph, and Louisa. Behind me, I could hear the whispers, see the phones coming out as people spread the news of Vivian's downfall. Well, Livia said, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. That was something. That, I replied, was just the foundation. Wait until they see what I build next. The night wasn't over, but the hardest part was done. I'd finally broken free of the prison Vivian had built around me, brick by careful brick, and I'd done it by building something stronger, my own empire of truth. The morning sun streamed through my office windows as I reviewed the final designs for the Sustainable City project. The governor's endorsement had fast-tracked everything, and construction would begin next month. Package for you, Louisa said, placing a thick envelope on my desk. Hand-delivered. I recognized Forrest's handwriting immediately. Inside was a letter, along with what looked like old photographs. Also, Vivian was spotted house hunting in Florida, Louisa added. Apparently, the social exile here became too much. How the mighty fall, I murmured, unfolding the letter. Before I could read it, Trinity burst in. Turn on the news, now. The Business Channel was running a feature on women in architecture, using my story as their centerpiece. But what caught my attention was the crawl at the bottom of the screen. Vivian Anderson resigns from all charity boards amid scandal. Full story at 11. That's not even the best part, Trinity grinned. Margaret just called. Apparently, Vivian tried to join 3 different country clubs in Palm Beach. They all rejected her membership. Karma, Louisa said, is a beautiful thing. I turned my attention back to Forrest's letter, reading aloud. Adeline, I found these while clearing out Mother's house. She kept a file on you, documenting every achievement she tried to diminish. Looking at them now, I see what I refused to see before. Your talent, your vision, your strength. The photos showed my early projects, newspaper clippings of my awards, even sketches I thought I'd lost years ago. "There's more," Trinity said, reading over my shoulder. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm getting help, learning to see the patterns Mother created, the way she manipulated everything and everyone. The divorce papers are signed. The house is yours. It's time I built my own life." Without Mother's blueprint, Randolph appeared in the doorway, ready for the board meeting. "Just a minute." I gathered the photos, pausing at one of my first design that won an award. The one Vivian had dismissed as amateur. The boardroom was full when I entered. These meetings felt different now. No more subtle undermining. No whispered doubts about my capabilities. "The Sustainable City Project is generating unprecedented interest," Randolph announced. "Thanks to Adeline's innovative design, we've secured funding for the next decade of development." My phone buzzed, a message from Livia. "Lunch, got tea to spill," about Vivian's failed attempt to join the Garden Society. "One more item," I said to the board. "I'd like to propose a mentorship program for young female architects. Give them what I never had: support, recognition, and a clear path to leadership." The vote was unanimous. As people filed out, Margaret lingered. "You know," she said, "watching Vivian's downfall has been satisfying. But watching you rise, that's been inspiring." Back in my office, I found another surprise: a young woman waiting nervously with her portfolio. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, standing quickly. "Your assistant said you might have a minute. I'm graduating from architecture school, and after seeing your story, I thought about all the doors Vivian had tried to close, all the talent she'd tried to suppress." "Come in," I said. "Show me what you've got." Later, walking through the city with Livia, I pointed out my buildings, each one a testament to surviving Vivian's attempts to destroy me. "Look what came today," Livia said, showing me her phone. The local paper's society page featured Vivian at a small Florida cafe, alone, no pearls in sight. The headline read, "Former Society Queen's Fall from Grace Continues." "You know what's better than revenge?" I asked, stopping to admire the performing arts center I'd designed. "Success, real, earned, undeniable success." Speaking of success, Livia nodded toward a construction site across the street. "Isn't that where your new women's business center will be? Breaking ground next week. We're calling it the Phoenix Center." "Rising from the ashes?" Livia smiled. "Something like that." My phone chimed, an email from the governor's office, confirming my appointment to the state's Urban Development Board, the position Vivian had coveted for years. "Perfect timing," I said, showing Livia the email. "The board meets in that building, right there, the one I designed last year." We laughed together, standing in the shadow of my creation. Around us, the city pulsed with life, each building telling its own story. But mine was written in steel and glass, reaching toward the sky, impossible to ignore or diminish. I'd built something Vivian could never tear down: a legacy of truth, strength, and redemption. And I was just getting started. "Come on," I told Livia. "I've got a city to rebuild. This time, no one would stand in my way."
The old Victorian house on Maple Street was my entire world when I was growing up. My father inherited it from his parents, and I can still picture my mother bragging about it to everyone who'd listen. "Just look at these original hardwood floors," she'd say during her endless backyard dinner parties, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass. "You just don't find craftsmanship like this anymore." I was 7 when we moved in, and while my mother was busy showing off her prized possession to her friends, I found solace in my father's company. Dad understood me in a way Mom never did. He'd notice when I finished one book and immediately appear with another, like magic. "Hannah," he'd say, his eyes twinkling as he pulled yet another novel from behind his back, "I think you're going to love this one." And I always did. Mom didn't get it. "Hannah, sweetie," she'd sigh, watching me curl up in the window seat with my latest treasure, "wouldn't you rather go play with the neighbor kids? Sarah from next door just got a new bike." "I'm good here, Mom," I'd reply, not looking up from my page. I could feel her disappointment from across the room, but Dad would just wink at me from behind his newspaper. I wasn't completely antisocial. I had my moments of glory at school, especially after I started writing for the school newspaper. My stories always got people talking, and even the popular kids would stop me in the hallway to ask when my next piece was coming out. But my favorite escape was still my grandmother's house, with its magical library room that smelled of old paper and leather. "A writer needs to read," Grandma would say, running her fingers along the spines of her beloved books. "How else will you learn to tell your own stories?" She'd let me spend hours in there, bringing me cookies and hot chocolate while I devoured everything from classic literature to modern mysteries. I was 12 when the police showed up at our door. I remember every detail of that moment: Mom's coffee cup shattering on the kitchen floor, the officer's grave expression, the words "terrible accident" echoing through our hallway. Just like that, Dad was gone. Mom cried for weeks. I'd hear her at night, muffling her sobs into her pillow. But then, something shifted. The tissues disappeared from her nightstand, replaced by makeup and perfume bottles. She started going out in the evenings, coming home with a bounce in her step and color in her cheeks. "Life goes on, Hannah," she told me one morning over breakfast, applying lipstick in her compact mirror. "We can't stay sad forever." I nodded, but something felt off. The way she said it, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I didn't know it then, but that morning marked the beginning of the end of my childhood. Mom met Richard at some office party. Within a week, he was having dinner at our house. Within 2 weeks, he'd moved in his things. Within a month, they were married in a small courthouse ceremony. It happened so fast, I barely had time to process that this stranger was now living in Dad's house, sleeping in Dad's bed, sitting in Dad's chair at our dinner table. The first time Grandma met Richard, I could see the concern in her eyes. She pulled Mom aside into the kitchen, but their whispered conversation quickly turned into raised voices. "Linda, you barely know this man," Grandma hissed. "Think about Hannah." "I am thinking about Hannah," Mom shot back. "She needs a father figure." "She had a father," Grandma's voice cracked. "And his memory deserves more respect than this." That was the last time Grandma was allowed in our house. Mom told her not to come back until she could be supportive. Richard never hit me or yelled at me, but he had other ways of making me feel unwelcome. He'd walk into a room where I was reading and immediately turn on the TV at full volume. If I was doing homework at the kitchen table, he'd start complaining about clutter. Once, when I was looking at Dad's old photos in the living room, Richard gathered them up and put them in a box. Mom watched it all and said nothing. Worse, she started sending me to my room whenever Richard came home from work. "Honey, Richard's had a long day," she'd say. "He needs some quiet time." Then Mom got pregnant, and whatever scraps of attention I had been getting disappeared completely. They turned Dad's old office into a nursery, cooing over paint samples and tiny clothes. When my sister Emily was born, you'd think she was the first baby ever to exist. One morning, I stood in front of Mom while she was feeding Emily. "Mom, none of my clothes fit anymore. I need new ones for school." She looked at me like I'd asked for a private jet. "Hannah, do you have any idea how expensive babies are? We just had to buy Emily a new crib." "But Mom, my jeans are all too short, and—" "For God's sake, Linda," Richard interrupted from behind his newspaper. "The girl acts like we're made of money. When I was her age, I wore hand-me-downs." Mom sighed heavily. "We'll go to the discount store this weekend. But this is the last time, Hannah. You're getting too expensive to maintain." Too expensive to maintain. Like I was a car with too many repair bills. I looked at Emily in her designer onesie, surrounded by new toys, and felt something inside me harden. I was trudging home from school one rainy Tuesday, lost in my thoughts, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. There, standing under a red umbrella with that mischievous smile I'd missed so much, was Grandma. "Hannah, sweetheart." She pulled me into a tight hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. "Oh, look at you. You've grown so tall. Grandma. I hugged her back fiercely, realizing just how much I'd missed her. I haven't seen you in forever. Her face clouded slightly. I know, dear. Your mother, well, she's made it clear I'm not welcome at the house anymore. Then her eyes twinkled. But what she doesn't know won't hurt her, right? How about we get some hot chocolate and catch up? At the small cafe around the corner, over steaming mugs and chocolate croissants, Grandma laid out her proposal. Your mother can't stop me from seeing my granddaughter, she said firmly. If she asks, just tell her you're out with friends. You do still have friends, don't you? And just like that, my life split in two. At home, I was the unwanted shadow, tiptoeing around Richard's moods and Mom's indifference. But my afternoons belonged to Grandma. We'd spend hours in her library, discussing books and writing. She'd help me with my homework, then we'd cook dinner together. Mom never questioned where I was spending my time. If anything, she seemed relieved when I'd come home late. This went on for about a year, until one night at dinner, Mom and Richard dropped their bomb. Emily needs her own room, Richard announced, cutting into his steak. She's getting too big for the nursery. I looked up from my plate, confused. But all the bedrooms are taken. Unless you're turning Dad's old office. We've decided to give her your room, Mom interrupted. You can sleep on the pull-out couch in the basement. The basement. The dark, damp space where Richard stored his tools and Mom kept old holiday decorations. Where the heating barely worked in winter. This isn't fair, I protested, looking to Mom for support. Dad would never. Well, your father isn't here, is he? Mom snapped. And quite frankly, Hannah, you should be grateful we're letting you stay here at all. Most kids your age would be happy to have any space to themselves. I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, as the full impact of her words hit me. Letting me stay here. Like I was some charity case they'd taken in, not the daughter who'd lived in this house since she was 7. Not the girl whose father had lovingly painted clouds on her bedroom ceiling when she was 10 because she said she wanted to sleep under the sky. When do you want me to move? I asked, my voice hollow. This weekend, Richard said. I want to start painting on Monday. Emily wants pink walls. That night, I lay in my bed for just 3 more days, and stared up at those fading clouds. I took a picture of them with my phone, knowing they'd soon be covered by whatever shade of pink Emily had chosen. Another piece of Dad erased. Another part of me displaced. Living in the basement turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The isolation gave me clarity, I needed a plan to get out. College became my lifeline, my ticket to freedom, and I threw myself into making it happen. Every afternoon at Grandma's house, I worked on my applications. My portfolio was growing impressive, editor of the school newspaper, 3 statewide creative writing competition wins, and a collection of short stories published in various youth literary magazines. My English teachers wrote glowing recommendations, especially Mrs. Peterson, who called me the most promising young writer I've encountered in 20 years of teaching. High school graduation day arrived with June's sticky heat. I sat among my classmates in the auditorium, scanning the crowd. Grandma was there, beaming proudly from the middle section, but Mom and Richard's seats remained empty. They'd announced at breakfast that Emily had a dance recital the same afternoon. After the ceremony, Grandma hugged me tight. Your father would have been so proud, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She slipped me an envelope. Inside was a card with a beautiful note and enough cash for a new laptop. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. 3 rejections, 2 waitlists, and then, the one I'd been hoping for. Riverside State University offered me a partial scholarship to their prestigious creative writing program. My hands shook as I read the letter for the 10th time. That evening, I decided to share the news at dinner. Maybe, just maybe, Mom would be proud. Maybe she'd remember how Dad used to say I'd be a famous writer someday. I got into Riverside State, I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. They're offering me a partial scholarship for their writing program. Richard didn't look up from his phone. Mom paused, fork halfway to her mouth, then set it down slowly. "Oh, Hannah," she sighed, and my heart sank at her tone. "We need to talk about college." "What do you mean?" "I've got the scholarship, and Dad's college fund." "About that," Mom interrupted, placing her hand protectively over her slightly swollen belly, a gesture I'd grown to hate. "We've had to make some adjustments to our financial planning. With the new baby coming." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What adjustments?" "Emily's private school tuition is already significant, and with another baby on the way." "My college fund?" I repeated numbly. "The money Dad saved for my education?" "Your father would understand," Mom said, her voice hardening. "Family comes first. Family comes first." The words echoed in my head like a bad joke. I looked at my mother, this stranger who wore my mom's face, and realized something that had been true for years: I wasn't part of her family anymore. I stood up so fast, my chair toppled backward. "That money isn't yours to spend." My voice came out sharp and clear, surprising even me. "Dad worked overtime for years to save that money. He wanted me to go to college." Mom's face flushed red. "How dare you be so selfish? Your sister needs—" "Emily is your daughter with Richard," I cut her off. "Dad's money was for me. His daughter. Or have you forgotten that's what I am?" Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "I've had enough of your attitude, young lady. Your mother and I have put up with your ingratitude for years. It's time she made a choice: either you start showing some respect, or—" "Or what?" I challenged. Mom stood up slowly, her hand still resting on her pregnant belly. "Or you can leave." The words hung in the air like poison. "Leave?" I repeated. "This is my house, Dad's house." "Actually," Mom's voice was ice cold, "since your father didn't leave a will, the house legally belongs to me. You're 18 now, an adult. I'm no longer legally required to provide for you." I stared at her in disbelief. This woman who used to pack heart-shaped sandwiches in my lunchbox, who once held me all night when I had a fever, was throwing me out of my own home. "You can't be serious." Mom walked to the front door and opened it wide. The spring evening air rushed in, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs, Dad's favorite. "Get out." I stood frozen for a moment, looking at this stranger in my mother's body. Then something inside me shifted, like a key turning in a lock. Without another word, I walked down to my basement room and started packing. It didn't take long, most of my belongings were books anyway. I could hear Emily upstairs, asking in her little voice what was happening. Richard's gruff response. Mom's silence. 20 minutes later, I walked out of my childhood home with 2 duffel bags and a backpack. I didn't look back. Grandma opened her door before I could even knock, one look at my face telling her everything she needed to know. She pulled me into her arms, and finally, I let myself cry. When I'd calmed down enough to tell her everything, her face grew stormy, but her voice remained steady. "You'll stay here, of course. And I'm paying for whatever that scholarship doesn't cover." "Grandma, no, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm telling." She squeezed my hand. "Your father would never forgive me if I let his daughter's dreams die because of—" She paused, choosing her words carefully, "this situation." 3 months later, I was moving into my dorm at Riverside State. I'd found a job at the campus cafe that worked around my class schedule. Between that, Grandma's help, and my scholarship, I could just about make it work. Mom never called. Never texted. Never tried to find out if I was okay. I deleted her number from my phone, but couldn't delete the ache in my chest that appeared every time I saw other students' parents visiting them on weekends. Junior year of college brought an unexpected turn in my life. While working on yet another creative writing assignment, I had an idea that wouldn't let go. It wasn't my usual style. Instead of literary fiction, I found myself writing a psychological thriller about a woman uncovering dark family secrets. Maybe I had some things to work through. You should enter it in the National Emerging Writers Competition, my favorite professor suggested after reading the first few chapters. It's different. Raw. Honest. I spent months perfecting the manuscript, writing between classes and cafe shifts, often staying up until dawn. When I finally submitted it under the pseudonym E.J. Blake, I didn't expect anything. The competition was notorious for attracting thousands of entries. Then came the call. "Is this Hannah Morrison?" a woman's crisp voice asked. "I'm calling from Riverside Publishing regarding your submission to the National Emerging Writers Competition." I gripped my phone tighter. "Yes? Ms. Morrison, we're pleased to inform you that the Glass House has won first prize. Furthermore, we'd like to offer you a publishing contract." I sat down hard on my dorm room floor. "I'm sorry, what?" The advance they offered was more money than I'd ever seen. The contract arrived the next day by courier, 12 pages of legal language that basically said they believed in me and wanted more books. The book hit shelves 4 months later. The reviews started rolling in. A stunning debut. Breathtakingly honest. A new voice in contemporary fiction. By the time I graduated college, I had 2 more books out under my pseudonym, both bestsellers. My second advance bought me a beautiful apartment in the city. The third let me quit my cafe job and write full-time. Grandma kept me updated on family news, though I never asked. Emily started first grade, she mentioned during one of our weekly dinners. And the little one, Thomas, just started kindergarten. I nodded, pushing my pasta around my plate. It was strange to think I had siblings out there who didn't know I existed. But I felt good without them, really good. Especially after I met David at a local bookstore where I was doing research for my 4th novel. He was a literature professor who had no idea his favorite new author was sitting right next to him in the classic literature section. E.J. Blake's latest book, he'd said, noticing me looking at a display of my own work. Brilliant stuff. Wish I knew who they really were. I smiled mysteriously. Maybe they just value their privacy. We married 2 years later in Grandma's backyard, surrounded by books and fairy lights. David insisted on reading a passage from the Glass House during his vows, still unaware he was quoting his own bride. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, with a library bigger than my old basement room and a garden full of lilacs. Life was good, better than good. And then one day there was an unexpected turn. "It's time," Marcus, my publisher, announced during our quarterly meeting. "Your new book is your strongest yet, and we think revealing E.J. Blake's identity would create exactly the buzz we need for the launch." Marcus was right, of course. The reveal was orchestrated perfectly, a major literary event at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Journalists, critics, and fans packed the ballroom. I stood backstage, my heart hammering. "Ready?" David whispered, straightening my blazer. "No," I laughed nervously. But when has that ever stopped me? The moment I stepped onto that stage, camera flashes exploding like stars, I felt strangely calm. "Hello," I said into the microphone. "I'm Hannah Morrison, but you might know me better as E.J. Blake." The room erupted. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My face was everywhere, magazine covers, morning shows, literary blogs. Mystery author revealed. E.J. Blake, literature's best-kept secret. The woman behind the words. Then came the message on social media. "Hannah, sweetheart. I've been watching you on TV. You look so beautiful, so successful. I've missed you so much. Can we talk? I want to make things right. Love, Mom." My finger hovered over the delete button. After 14 years of silence, now she wanted to talk? "I have nothing to say to you," I wrote back. "Please don't contact me again." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I was in my home office when David called up from downstairs. "There's someone at the door." I knew before I reached the foyer. Mom stood on my porch, older but still recognizable. Her eyes were red and puffy. Oh, Hannah, she cried, stepping forward with outstretched arms. I stayed behind the screen door. What do you want? She wiped her eyes, composing herself with surprising speed. I've been following your success. You've done so well for yourself. No thanks to you. I know. I made mistakes. She wrung her hands. But I'm here because, well, Emily is graduating high school next month. She's so bright, Hannah. She got accepted to several colleges, but with Thomas still in school and the economy being what it is. I let out a harsh laugh. You're here for money? She's your sister, Mom pressed. And I know you're doing well now. Those books must bring in quite a bit. My sister? I interrupted. The same sister you gave my room to? The sister you spent my college fund on? That sister? Hannah, please. We're family. No. My voice was steel. We're not family. Family doesn't throw their child out on the street. Family doesn't steal their college fund. You made your choice 14 years ago, Mom. You chose Richard and your new family over me. You don't get to show up now, acting like a loving mother, just because you want my money. You ungrateful, selfish brat. Mom's voice rose to a shriek. After everything we did for you. She was causing a scene now, her voice echoing down our quiet street. You'd let your own sister suffer, just to spite me. I stepped back inside. Goodbye, Mom. The door closed with a satisfying thud, drowning out her continued screams. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, David called me into the living room, his face grim. On the TV screen was my mother, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as she spoke to a sympathetic interviewer. My daughter abandoned us, she sobbed. As soon as she got famous, she forgot where she came from. Now her little sister needs help with college, and she won't even answer our calls. Money changed her. Success made her cruel. The interview was just the beginning. Soon, my social media was flooded with hate messages from strangers who'd read Mom's posts about her heartless daughter who threw away her family for fame. Karma will get you, one comment read. What kind of person abandons their family, said another. Your poor mother. Your poor sister. I was shell-shocked until Marcus called. We're holding a press conference, he said firmly. Time to tell your side. I don't want to air my dirty laundry in public, I protested. Hannah, he said gently, you've built your career on telling the truth through your stories. Maybe it's time to tell your own. The next morning, I stood at the podium, cameras flashing. Grandma sat beside me, her spine straight as steel, her eyes clear and determined. My name is Hannah Morrison, I began, my voice steady. And this is the story my mother isn't telling you. For the next hour, we laid out everything. The college fund that was stolen. The basement bedroom. The cruel stepfather. The day I was thrown out. Grandma provided bank statements showing she'd paid for my education. I had old text messages, school records, witnesses from my teenage years. I didn't abandon my family, I concluded. They abandoned me. The only family I had left was my grandmother, who took me in when my own mother threw me away. I built myself up from nothing, with no help from the woman now demanding I fund her new family's dreams. The story broke like a tsunami. Author reveals years of family abuse, the headlines read. Mother's claims backfire. The true story behind E.J. Blake. My latest book shot to #1 on every bestseller list. Mom tried one more social media rant, but my lawyer's cease and desist letter shut that down quickly. One more false statement, I warned her, and I'll see you in court. She finally fell silent. That was 5 years ago. Life has settled into a peaceful rhythm since then. David and I have our quiet home, our library, our garden. Grandma comes for Sunday dinner every week, and we laugh and talk and share stories, real ones, honest ones. Sometimes I think about Emily and Thomas, the siblings I'll never know. I hope they're happy. I hope they're loved. I hope their mother learned to be better for them than she was for me. but mostly, I don't think about that part of my past at all. I've learned that family isn't always about blood, sometimes it's about the people who choose to stay when others walk away. Sometimes it's about building something new from the ashes of what was lost. I never really knew my mom. She passed away when I was just 3, leaving behind only a collection of photographs and the faintest memories that sometimes feel more like dreams. My dad, James Parker, owned a small but successful business that often took him away on trips. He was a good man, just, sometimes too trusting, I guess. I remember the day Dad introduced me to Sarah. I was 4, and he told me she was going to be my new mom. She had long blonde hair and smiled a lot, at least when Dad was around. They got married pretty quickly, and within a year, I had a baby sister named Emma. "Rose, come meet your little sister," Dad had said, beaming with pride. I remember touching Emma's tiny fingers and thinking how cool it would be to have a sister to play with. If only I'd known then how things would turn out. My grandmother, Dad's mom, visited us often in those early days. She was this warm, energetic woman who always brought me cookies and told the best stories. But I started noticing the tension between her and Sarah pretty early on. "James, dear," Grandma would say, looking around our increasingly messy house, "perhaps Sarah could use some help with the housework? The dishes have been piling up." Sarah would grip her coffee mug tighter, that fake smile plastered on her face. "Oh, Mother, you know how busy I am with the baby. These things take time." Later, I'd overhear Sarah on the phone with her friends, that old witch. Can you believe her? Coming into my house and criticizing my housekeeping? She's absolutely crazy. The tension kept building until one day, when I was about 6, it all exploded. Grandma had come over unexpectedly and found Sarah lounging on the couch while I was trying to reach the sink to wash dishes. "This is unacceptable," Grandma had shouted. "She's just a child, Sarah. You can't make her do everything while you sit around all day." Sarah burst into tears, fake ones, I now know, and ran to Dad's office. "I can't take it anymore, James. Your mother, she's trying to destroy our family. She's always criticizing me, always making me feel worthless. You have to choose, James, your mother or your family." That was the last time I saw my grandmother for many years. Dad chose Sarah, just like she knew he would. He called Grandma and told her not to come around anymore. I remember seeing her walk down our driveway for the last time, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Good riddance to that crazy old woman," Sarah had muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. Then she turned to me with those cold eyes I'd come to know so well. "From now on, Rose, my mother is your only grandmother. Understand?" I nodded, fighting back tears. That was the day I learned an important lesson. In our house, Sarah's word was law, and anyone who challenged her would disappear from our lives. I was 7 years old, and my real nightmare was just beginning. Everything changed right after my 8th birthday. Sarah called me into the living room one morning while Dad was away on another business trip. Emma was playing with her toys, scattering them everywhere as usual. "Rose, you're a big girl now," Sarah said, her voice sickly sweet. "It's time you started helping around the house. You'll be responsible for keeping things tidy and clean." I didn't think much of it at first. I'd always been neat with my own things anyway, and I thought helping meant normal kid stuff like making my bed or putting away my toys. But Sarah had other plans. "Start with picking up Emma's mess," she ordered, pointing at the chaos of toys, crayons, and crushed crackers covering the floor. "And make sure you vacuum after." That became my new normal. Every day, I'd clean up after Emma, who seemed to take special delight in making messes. She'd dump out entire boxes of cereal, just to find the toy at the bottom, spill juice on purpose, and leave sticky handprints on every surface she could reach. "Can my friend Katie come over to play?" I asked one day, hopeful for some normal kid time. Sarah's face hardened. "Absolutely not. Your little friends will just make more mess for you to clean up. Besides, you have chores to do." I watched through the window as Emma's friends came over regularly, turning the house upside down while I trailed behind them with a trash bag and cleaning supplies. One day, when I was cleaning up another of Emma's disasters, I tried to reason with her. She was 3 by then, old enough to understand basic things, I thought. "Emma, please try to pick up your toys when you're done playing," I said gently. "It would really help." "Rose," Sarah's sharp voice cut through the air. She stormed into the room, face red with anger. "How dare you tell your sister what to do? She's growing up to be smart and successful, she doesn't need to waste her time cleaning. That's your job." By the time I turned 9, I was basically running the household whenever Dad was away. Sarah would leave me alone for hours while she took Emma to play centers, parks, or her friends' houses. I was terrified of using the stove, I could barely reach the controls, but I was more scared of Sarah's anger if dinner wasn't ready. I'd drag a chair to the counter, trying to figure out how to make simple things like pasta or heat up soup, constantly afraid I'd burn myself or start a fire. Dad's homecomings were like watching a magic show. Sarah would transform into a completely different person the moment his key turned in the lock. The house would already be spotless, she'd spend the morning cleaning it herself for once, and she'd be in the kitchen cooking his favorite meals. "Oh James, I'm just exhausted," she'd sigh, playing the role of the overwhelmed housewife perfectly. "Taking care of 2 growing girls is such hard work. The house is so big, and there's so much to do. Maybe a part-time nanny for the girls? And perhaps a housekeeper to help with the cleaning? But it's so expensive." Of course, Dad would immediately agree. "Anything to make things easier for you, dear. Just tell me how much you need." I'd watch from the stairs as Sarah collected the checks or cash, knowing that money would never go to any nanny or housekeeper. I was doing all that work for free, after all. But I couldn't say anything. Sarah had made sure of that. "You see how easily your father cut off contact with his own mother," she'd whispered to me one day when Dad was in the shower. "I convinced him to do that. Just imagine what I could make him believe about you if you don't behave." That threat hung over me constantly. I'd seen how quickly Dad had turned against Grandma, would he do the same to me? I couldn't risk it. So I stayed quiet and did whatever Sarah demanded. While I scrubbed floors and did laundry, Sarah spent Dad's household help money on herself and Emma. She'd come home from the beauty salon with fresh highlights and manicured nails, shopping bags full of designer clothes for Emma dangling from her arms. "Here, Rose," she'd toss me a bag from the clearance rack at the discount store. "I got you some things too. They're not quite as nice as Emma's, but beggars can't be choosers, right?" The worst was when she'd look at me with that curl of disgust in her lip, usually when I was doing something she considered beneath her, like scrubbing the toilets or mopping the kitchen floor. "God, you look just like your grandmother right now," she'd sneer. That same stubborn, judgmental expression. No wonder she ended up alone, and no wonder you will too if you don't learn your place. Those words would echo in my head at night as I lay in bed, exhausted from another day of being Sarah's secret servant. I'd think about Grandma, wondering if she ever thought about me, wondering if she knew what was happening in our house. Sarah's mother, who insisted I call her Grandma Linda, lived just a few blocks away from us. But unlike my real grandmother who'd been forced out of my life, Linda made it clear from the start that she didn't consider me family. "Oh, Sarah, darling," she'd coo when we visited, pulling Emma into her lap while completely ignoring my presence. "It must be so difficult for you, having to raise someone else's child. And spending all that money on her too." Sarah would put on her victim face, the same one she'd perfected for Dad. "It is hard, Mom. Rose is becoming so difficult lately. So angry and disobedient. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, trying to raise her as my own." I'd sit quietly in the corner of Linda's living room, pretending to read a book while they talked about me as if I wasn't even there. Linda would shower Emma with gifts, new toys, pretty dresses, expensive dolls, while giving me disapproving glances. Linda would take Emma for special grandmother-granddaughter outings, to the zoo, to the movies, to the park, while I was left behind. Sarah would remind me to be grateful that Linda tolerated me at all. After all, she'd say with that cruel smile, "You're not really her granddaughter, are you? Just like I'm not really your mother." We're stuck with each other, unfortunately. As I approached my 12th birthday, Sarah's demands increased exponentially. The cleaning schedule became more rigorous, the standards impossibly high. Every surface had to sparkle, every floor had to shine, every piece of laundry had to be perfectly folded, and heaven help me if I fell behind. "Look at these windows," she'd shriek, running her finger along the glass. "I can see streaks. Do it again. And don't forget to dust the blinds this time." Or, "These bathroom tiles are still dirty. Get down on your hands and knees and scrub them properly. I want to see my reflection in them." The punishments for not meeting her standards were creative and cruel. She'd make me stay up late redoing tasks, knowing I had school the next day. She'd accidentally spill things right after I'd finished cleaning, forcing me to start over. She'd hide my phone or computer until the house met her impossible standards. But I never breathed a word of this to Dad. The threat of losing my chance at college loomed over everything. College represented freedom to me, a escape from this house, from Sarah's control, from the endless cleaning and cooking and serving. I dreamed about living in a dorm, having real friends, being normal. "One word to your father about our little arrangement," Sarah would threaten, "and you can kiss those college dreams goodbye. I'll make sure he knows what an ungrateful, lazy burden you've been." Who do you think he'll believe, his loving wife or his difficult teenage daughter? So I kept quiet, did my chores, and focused on my studies whenever I could find the time. I counted down the days until I could leave for college, telling myself that if I could just hold on long enough, I'd finally be free. But freedom seemed so far away, and Sarah's control only grew stronger with each passing day. Late at night, when the house was finally quiet and my hands were raw from cleaning, I'd lie in bed and imagine what my life could have been like if my mom hadn't died, or if Dad hadn't married Sarah, or if Grandma was still around. Several years have passed, and my grades had been slipping for months. Between the constant cleaning, cooking, and trying to keep up with Sarah's endless demands, I barely had time to study. Most nights, I'd fall asleep over my textbooks, exhausted from another day of being the family's secret servant. When Dad came home from his latest business trip, Sarah was ready with her newest performance. "James, we need to talk about Rose," she said during dinner, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Her teacher's called today. She's falling behind in almost every subject. I try to help her with homework, but she'd rather spend time on her phone than study. I think she needs consequences." "I'm not lazy," I finally burst out. "I'm trying my best." "Rose," Dad cut me off sternly. "Your grades are important. I work hard to provide for this family, and I expect you to take your education seriously. No phone for a month." I felt something snap inside me. Years of pent-up frustration and anger bubbled to the surface. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, about the cleaning, the cooking, how Sarah treated me when he was away. But Sarah must have seen the rebellion in my eyes. She pulled me aside after dinner, her nails digging into my arm. "Remember your grandmother?" she hissed. "Remember how easily your father chose me over her? One word from me, and you'll never see him again. Is that what you want?" The fight drained out of me. I knew she was right, she had Dad wrapped around her finger. I couldn't risk losing him too. A few weeks later, Sarah threw Emma a massive 10th birthday party. I watched from the kitchen as a dozen of Emma's friends invaded our house, carrying presents and squealing with excitement. Sarah had ordered mountains of food, pizzas, burgers, sodas, and a huge cake. "Rose," Sarah called out. "Bring more napkins. And make sure everyone has drinks." I became their reluctant server, bringing food and cleaning up spills, while Emma and her friends treated me like their personal maid. They deliberately knocked things over, laughing as I scrambled to clean up. "Hey, servant girl," one of Emma's friends called out. "We need more pizza over here." They all burst into giggles as I silently brought them another plate. By the time the party ended, the house looked like a disaster zone. Soda stains covered the carpet, pizza crusts were ground into the couch, and sticky candy wrappers were everywhere. "This place is disgusting," Sarah sneered after the last guest left. "Clean it up. All of it. And do a proper job this time." I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the floor when Dad's Skype call came through. Sarah yanked me up by my arm. "James," she answered sweetly. "You'll never believe what happened today. Rose had some friends over, and they completely trashed the living room. I'd been cleaning for hours." I stood there, stunned by her blatant lie, as Dad's face darkened on the screen. "Rose," he said severely, "you need to help Sarah more and start behaving better. She's been telling me about your attitude lately, and I'm very disappointed." That night, after finishing the cleaning and listening to another lecture from Sarah about my poor work, I cried myself to sleep. I was 15 years old, but I felt ancient, worn down by years of Sarah's psychological warfare and Dad's blind trust in her lies. The next day at school, I couldn't focus on anything. My friend Jessica noticed something was wrong during lunch break. "Rose, you look terrible. What happened?" I told her everything about Emma's party, the lies, the endless cleaning, and how Sarah had manipulated my father once again. To my surprise, Jessica didn't just offer sympathy, she had an idea. "Your phone," she said, her eyes lighting up. "It has a voice recorder, right? Record her. Record everything she says to you when your dad's not around. Your dad needs to hear the truth, Rose. The real Sarah, not the perfect stepmother act she puts on for him." That afternoon, I started recording. As soon as Dad's car left for his latest business trip, Sarah's mask came off. "This floor is filthy," she screamed while I was mopping. "Are you stupid or just lazy? Do it again." The phone in my pocket captured every word. Later, while I was dusting the living room, "You're just like your grandmother, useless and ungrateful. This house needs to be spotless, do you understand me?" The recordings kept piling up. Sarah ordering me around, calling me names, threatening me. But the biggest revelation came that evening. "Listen here," she cornered me in the kitchen. "If you don't shape up, I'll tell your father you've been stealing money from my purse. I'll say I caught you drinking alcohol in your room. Who do you think he'll believe?" I felt my phone recording in my pocket and managed to keep my face neutral, though my heart was racing. Later that night, Sarah's friend Diane came over. They opened a bottle of wine in the kitchen, not realizing I was still awake, my phone recording through the crack in my bedroom door. "Remember when I got rid of his mother?" Sarah laughed, the wine loosening her tongue. "That old bat was getting too nosy, asking too many questions about how I spent James's money. So I told him she threatened me, said she was trying to destroy our marriage. He bought it completely. Cut her off just like that." "You're brilliant," Diane giggled. "And he never suspected?" "Please, James believes anything I tell him. He's such a sucker for the helpless wife act. Meanwhile, I get his money, and his precious daughter does all my housework. It's perfect." They kept talking, revealing more and more of Sarah's manipulations and lies. My phone recorded it all. That night, after making sure Sarah was asleep, I sat at my computer, hands shaking. I created a new email to Dad and attached all the recordings. In the subject line, I wrote, "The truth about Sarah." The message was simple: "Dad, it's time you knew what your wife is really like when you're not around. Please listen to these recordings. All of them, Rose." 2 days after I sent the email, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a car door slam. Looking through the window, I saw Dad's car in the driveway. He wasn't supposed to be home for another week. My heart started racing. The front door burst open with such force that the walls shook. Dad stormed in, his face a thundercloud of anger I'd never seen before. Sarah jumped up from the couch, dropping her magazine. "James," she stuttered, her face going pale. "What are you doing home?" "I know everything, Sarah." Dad's voice was deadly quiet. "Everything about how you've been treating my daughter." Sarah's eyes darted to me for a split second before she launched into her usual act. "Oh, James, has Rose been telling you lies again? You know how difficult she can be." Dad pulled out his phone. "Difficult? Let's talk about difficult, Sarah." He pressed play, and Sarah's own voice filled the room. "Listen here, if you don't shape up, I'll tell your father you've been stealing money." Sarah's face drained of all color. Dad played more recordings, her screaming at me to clean, calling me names, and finally, the conversation with Diane about manipulating Dad to cut off contact with Grandma. "You monster," Dad whispered when the recordings finished. "You absolute monster. Making my daughter into your personal servant? Lying about my mother? Using me for my money?" "James, I can explain," Sarah started, but Dad cut her off. "We're done. I'm divorcing you. I won't spend another minute married to someone who could abuse a child like this." He turned to me. "Rose, go pack your things. Only what you need right now, we'll get the rest later." 20 minutes later, we were in Dad's car, driving away from the only home I'd known for the past 8 years. Dad had made a few quick calls and arranged a furnished apartment for us. Once we were inside the apartment, Dad pulled me into a tight hug. I couldn't remember the last time he'd hugged me like this. "I'm so sorry, Rose," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see what was happening. I promise you, no one will ever hurt you like that again." The next morning, we drove to a small house on the other side of town. My heart skipped a beat when I realized where we were, Grandma's house. She opened the door before we could even knock. Despite not seeing her for years, I recognized her immediately, the same kind eyes, the same warm smile. Without a word, she pulled me into her arms. Dad broke down then, telling Grandma everything, the recordings, Sarah's abuse, the lies that had torn our family apart. Grandma listened, nodding sadly. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "Sarah never worked, just spent your money like water. When I tried to talk to her about it, she told me you were her money bag and she'd spend whatever she wanted. Then she threatened to turn you against me and keep you from seeing your grandchildren. And she did exactly that." I watched Dad's face crumple with shame as he realized how completely Sarah had manipulated him. But Grandma just took his hand and squeezed it, showing that same forgiveness and love I remembered from my childhood. The divorce proceedings stretched on for several months. Sarah fought tooth and nail for everything she could get, but in the end, the judge ordered an even split of all assets. Dad let her keep the old house, neither of us wanted to live there anymore, too many bad memories, and he used his half to buy us a beautiful new home closer to Grandma. Emma chose to stay with Sarah, which hurt Dad deeply, but didn't surprise me. Sarah had spent years molding Emma into her mini-me, poisoning her against Dad, just as she'd tried to do with me. When Dad attempted to maintain a relationship with Emma, she blocked his number. "She's just like her mother now," I overheard him telling Grandma one day, his voice heavy with regret. But while we lost Emma, our own little family grew stronger. Dad started working mostly from home, cutting back on business trips. He hired a real housekeeper this time, a kind woman named Maria who taught me that cleaning could actually be peaceful when it wasn't forced on you. The therapy sessions were Dad's idea. "You've been through trauma, Rose," he said one morning over breakfast. "We both have. And we need help processing it." Dr. Anderson, my therapist, helped me understand that none of what happened was my fault. In our joint sessions, Dad would often break down crying. "I should have protected you," he'd say. "I should have seen what was happening." But I didn't blame him anymore. Sarah had been manipulating him just as much as she'd been abusing me. She was an expert at playing the victim while making others suffer. Grandma became a regular part of our lives again, coming over for Sunday dinners and helping me with college applications. My grades improved dramatically now that I actually had time to study. The dark circles under my eyes faded, and I started sleeping through the night without anxiety attacks. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Sarah and Emma around town. They'd turn away quickly, Sarah pulling Emma close as if to protect her from me. It was ironic, really. Sarah had spent years painting me as the villain in Emma's eyes, when she was the monster all along. But I didn't waste energy being angry anymore. Instead, I focused on my future. I'd been accepted to several colleges, including my dream school with a partial scholarship. Dad insisted on paying the rest, saying it was the least he could do. "You deserve every opportunity," he told me. "And I'm so proud of how strong you've been." Sitting here now in my bedroom, surrounded by college brochures and acceptance letters, I can hardly believe how much my life has changed in the past year. The scared, servile girl I used to be feels like a stranger. Now I know what real family love feels like, not the conditional, manipulative kind Sarah offered, but the genuine support and care I get from Dad and Grandma. Tomorrow we have another therapy session, and next week I need to make my final college decision. But for the first time in years, I'm not afraid of the future. I'm excited about it. The nightmare is over, and I'm finally free to be myself. Sarah tried to break me, but instead, she made me stronger. And while I'll never forget what happened in that house, I won't let it define me either. I was 10 years old when my world changed forever. I still remember that night clearly, the sound of breaking glass, my mom crying, and my 5-year-old sister Sarah clutching my arm as we huddled in our shared bedroom. It was the night Mom finally had enough of Dad's drinking and kicked him out. The changes came fast. Dad disappeared completely, no visits, no child support, nothing. Mom had to work longer hours at her office job, leaving me to pick up the slack at home. At 10, I learned to use the microwave, figured out how to work the washing machine, and became responsible for getting Sarah ready for school. "Lucy, you're such a good big sister," Mom would say, kissing my forehead when she came home late, exhausted from work. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But it wasn't easy. While other kids my age were playing after school, I was walking Sarah home, helping her with homework, and trying to keep our small apartment somewhat clean. I learned to make simple meals, sandwiches, pasta, anything that didn't require using the stove. Sarah would complain about having the same food all the time, but I did my best. Mom and I sacrificed everything for Sarah. When she needed new shoes, I wore my old ones for another season. When she wanted to join the dance class, Mom picked up extra shifts to pay for it. We wanted her to have a normal childhood, even if it meant we couldn't have one ourselves. The years passed this way, with me juggling school and home responsibilities while Mom worked herself to exhaustion. Then, when I was 13, something amazing happened. Mom got promoted to senior manager at her company. Suddenly, our financial struggles began to ease. "Girls, I have something to tell you," Mom announced one evening, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We're going to be able to move to a house. A real house with a yard." Sarah squealed with delight, but I felt a mix of emotions. Yes, I was happy we'd have more space, and Mom wouldn't have to work quite so many hours. But I'd made friends in our neighborhood, and my school was here. When Mom said I could stay at my current school, I felt relieved. Sarah, however, was enrolled in an expensive private school across town. Several years have passed since then. Mom earned well, and I was able to continue my studies after school. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Mom helped me pack my few belongings into her car for the 3-hour drive to State University, while Sarah lounged on the couch, barely looking up from her phone to say goodbye. "Call me when you get settled," Mom said, hugging me tight outside my dormitory. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "I'm so proud of you, Lucy." I watched her drive away, knowing the sacrifices she'd made to get me here. No dating, no social life, just endless work and saving to give us both a chance at a good education. The tuition money she'd saved for me represented years of overtime and careful budgeting. I was determined not to waste a penny of it. My dorm room was tiny, with creaky furniture and a roommate who barely spoke English, but it felt like freedom. Within a week, I'd found a job at the campus coffee shop, working early morning shifts, before classes. The manager liked that I already knew how to balance responsibilities. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to breathe, but I loved it. My professors noticed my dedication, and by the end of my first semester, I was on the dean's list. That's when the calls from Sarah started becoming more frequent. "Lucy, you'll never believe how unfair Mom is being," she whined through the phone one evening as I was finishing my economics homework. "Everyone at school is going to Coachella, but she says it's too expensive. $3,000 isn't even that much." I nearly choked on my ramen noodles. 3,000? Sarah, that's crazy. The calls followed a pattern. One week it was concert tickets, the next it was a designer bag everyone at her school had. When Mom refused, Sarah would call me, hoping I'd either send money or convince Mom to give in. My breakthrough came during junior year. My business strategy professor recommended me for an internship at Preston & Associates, one of the top firms in the city. The work was challenging, but I threw myself into every task, staying late and coming in early. "We don't usually do this," Mr. Preston told me one afternoon, "but we'd like to offer you a position here after graduation. Your work ethic is exceptional." I was walking back to my dorm, still floating from the news, when my phone buzzed. Sarah again. "Mom's being impossible," she started, without even saying hello. "She won't give me money for a spring break trip to Cancun. Everyone's going except me. Can you send me like $800? I'll pay you back someday." "Sarah, why don't you get a part-time job?" I suggested, not for the first time. "The mall's always hiring. You could earn your own money for things like this." "Ugh, as if. You so boring and responsible all the time. No wonder you don't have any friends at college. All you do is work and study." She hung up before I could respond. I stood outside my dorm building, staring at my phone and wondering how two sisters could turn out so differently. While I was building my future one coffee order and study session at a time, Sarah was still waiting for everything to be handed to her on a silver platter. Graduation day felt surreal. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I spotted Mom in the audience, beaming with pride. Sarah wasn't there, she had a really important social event that day. 2 weeks later, I started at Preston & Associates. When my first real paycheck hit my account, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I spent hours picking out the perfect gifts, an elegant silk scarf and matching bag for Mom, and a high-end makeup set from Sarah's favorite brand for my sister. "Surprise!" I called out, walking into our family home one Friday evening. Mom was in the kitchen, cooking dinner as always. "Lucy," Mom rushed to hug me. When I handed her the wrapped package, her eyes welled up. "Oh, honey, this is too much," she whispered, running her fingers over the silk. "Nothing's too much for you, Mom." Sarah clomped down the stairs then, already frowning. "I thought I heard your voice. What are you doing here?" "I brought you something." I handed her the beautifully wrapped makeup set. She opened it carelessly, ripping the paper. "Oh, I actually wanted the other collection from this brand." "You should have just given me the money, I would have bought what I actually needed." "Sarah," Mom scolded, but I just shrugged. Some things never changed. Life moved quickly after that. I rented a small but clean apartment closer to work, determined to save enough for a down payment on my own place someday. At Preston & Associates, I threw myself into every project, staying late and coming in early. Within 6 months, I had my first promotion. Then came the call from Mom. "I don't know what to do anymore," she sighed. "Sarah's dropped out of college. Says it's not for her. Do you know how much money I've already paid for this semester? She says she's going to be an influencer. Keeps asking for money for camera equipment and designer clothes for her videos. Lucy, I'm still working 60-hour weeks to pay for all this." I tried talking to Sarah, driving to her favorite coffee shop where she was working on content. "Oh my God, spare me the responsible big sister act." She rolled her eyes. "Not everyone wants your boring corporate life. I'm building my brand. Mom gets it, even if you don't." But Mom didn't get it. She kept working overtime to support Sarah's influencer career, which seemed to consist mainly of shopping hauls and coffee shop photos. Then I met James. It was at my friend Maria's housewarming party. He was her colleague from the architecture firm down the street. "Want to grab coffee sometime?" he asked as the party was winding down. One coffee date turned into dinner, dinner turned into weekend trips, and before I knew it, a year had passed. When he proposed, it felt right. We moved in together in my rented apartment, planning to save for a house. By then, Sarah had her own place too, funded by Mom, of course. She'd gotten a job at an upscale boutique, though it seemed more about the employee discount than actual work. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a presentation when I saw Mom's number flash on my phone. Something in my gut told me to step out and take it. "Lucy?" Mom's voice was small, unlike I'd ever heard it before. "I need you to come to the hospital. The doctors, they found something." The next few hours passed in a blur. I drove the 3 hours to my hometown, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Cancer, stage 3. Words like aggressive treatment and survival rates bounced off the sterile hospital walls while I held Mom's trembling hand. All I could think about was how small she looked in that huge hospital bed, this woman who had always been our family's foundation. Mom had to quit her job despite her protests that she could still work. Thankfully, her years of careful saving meant she had enough put aside for treatment. She'd always been preparing for some unnamed future emergency. I just never imagined it would be this. The first rounds of chemotherapy were brutal. I'd drive to Mom's house after work, help her to the bathroom, make dinner, and try not to let her see me cry as more of her hair fell out. The 3-hour drive back home in the dark was exhausting, but I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone. "Sarah should be here to see this," Mom whispered one evening as I was preparing her favorite soup. "She should know." I called Sarah that evening on my drive home. "Mom's asking for you." "I'm really busy right now, Lucy. I've got this collaboration coming up." "She has cancer, Sarah. She needs both her daughters." A long pause. I can't deal with hospitals and sick people. It's too depressing, you know?" I pulled over to the side of the highway, my hands trembling with anger. "I'll pay you. Monthly. Whatever you're making at the boutique, I'll match it if you'll help take care of Mom when I can't be here." Sarah's laugh was cold. "Are you serious? I'm not going to waste my time playing nurse to a sick person. That's what actual nurses are for." The next day, I arranged for a professional nurse, Angela, despite Mom's protests that it was too expensive. "You need proper care when I'm at work or driving back home," I insisted. Angela turned out to be a blessing, capable, kind, and professional in all the ways Sarah refused to be. But then a new problem emerged. "James. You're never home anymore," he complained one night when I finally made it back to our apartment around midnight. "I feel like I'm living alone. My mother has cancer, James. She needs me." "And what about what I need?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "When was the last time we had dinner together? Or watched a movie? Or did anything normal couples do? This isn't forever," I tried to explain, exhausted from the long drive. "She's sick. She needs help. That's what the nurse is for. You don't have to drive there every single day. You're going to kill yourself with these long drives. You look exhausted all the time." But I couldn't stop. Sarah wouldn't do it. James didn't understand. And Mom had spent 25 years taking care of us. How could I do any less for her now? As the weeks of Mom's treatment wore on, I started noticing uncomfortable similarities between James and Sarah. They both had the same way of shirking responsibility, the same talent for making excuses, the same aversion to anything that wasn't fun or easy. I first noticed it during one of our weekend visits to Mom's house. While I was upstairs helping Mom with her medication and making sure she ate something, I could hear laughter floating up from below. James and Sarah were sitting in the living room, sharing jokes and stories like old friends. "Honey," Mom whispered, "go tell them to keep it down. I went downstairs to find them sharing Sarah's phone screen, both grinning at something. "Could you two please keep it down?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Mom's trying to rest." "And James, could you come help me with her lunch?" They looked up at me like teenagers caught passing notes in class. "Always so serious," Sarah rolled her eyes. "God, you're such a buzzkill," James added. "Totally boring," they said almost simultaneously, then burst into fresh laughter at their synchronicity. I stood there, watching my husband and sister share a private joke at my expense, and felt something shift inside me. Something important was happening here, but I was too exhausted to figure out what it was. The months crawled by in a haze of hospital visits, late-night drives, and increasingly frequent moments of finding James and Sarah in deep conversation. But then, finally, a miracle: Mom's latest test showed remission. The cancer was retreating. "You need a break," my boss said after I burst into tears of relief at my desk. "Take some time off. You've more than earned it." That night, I browsed through travel websites, looking at beach resorts and tropical paradises. For the first time in months, I let myself dream about something other than hospital corridors and medication schedules. "The Maldives?" James said, suddenly interested as he peered over my shoulder. It was the most engaged he'd been with me in months. "That looks amazing." "I was thinking about a couple of weeks there," I said cautiously. "Now that Mom's better." "Yes," his enthusiasm surprised me. "Let's do it, I'll take time off too. God knows we need this." For the next few days, we were almost like newlyweds again, excitedly planning our trip. We booked an overwater bungalow, researched restaurants, planned snorkeling excursions. James even surprised me by arranging a couple's massage package. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Maybe this vacation would help us find our way back to each other. Maybe all we needed was some time away from everything: the hospitals, the stress, the constant worry. 1 week before our scheduled departure to the Maldives, Mom collapsed. I was at work when Angela called. "Lucy, you need to come quickly. Your mother's not well." The familiar drive to Mom's house had never felt longer. At the hospital, the doctors spoke in grave tones about heart complications from the chemotherapy. Mom looked so fragile in the hospital bed, nothing like the woman who'd raised us. "Sarah," I said when she finally answered my call, "I need you to stay with Mom. I can't be here all the time, and she needs someone." "Are you kidding me?" Sarah cut me off. "I told you, I'm not playing nurse. I have plans." I hung up and called James next. His reaction was worse. "No," he said flatly when I told him I couldn't go on the trip. "No way. You are not canceling this vacation. My mother is in the hospital." "There's always something with your mother. The tickets are non-refundable, Lucy. I'm going, with or without you." "Are you serious right now? My mother could be dying." "Yeah? Well, our marriage is dying too, but you don't seem to care about that." I packed a bag and moved to Mom's house that night. James didn't try to stop me. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. James had posted a photo of his overwater bungalow. "Paradise found," read the caption. I tried to push down my anger and focus on Mom. But on the third morning, as I was helping her take a sip of water, she squeezed my hand weakly. "Lucy," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Those were her last words. Her heart gave out an hour later. The world stopped making sense. I moved through the next few hours in a fog, holding her cold hand until the doctors gently pulled me away. My calls to James went straight to voicemail. Sarah's phone just rang and rang. I sat alone in Mom's quiet house, surrounded by sympathy casseroles from neighbors, trying to plan a funeral for the woman who'd given everything for us. The funeral home needed decisions. The obituary needed writing. But my husband was gone, and my sister was nowhere to be found. In desperation, I called Jenny, Sarah's best friend since high school. "Jenny, have you heard from Sarah? I can't reach her, and Mom." Mom died this morning. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Lucy. Her voice was small, guilty. I think you should know something. Sarah, she's in the Maldives. She's with James. They left together. I'm so sorry, Lucy. I should have told you sooner, but Sarah made me promise. I hung up before she could finish. With shaking hands, I opened Sarah's Instagram profile. There it was, a photo of a tropical sunset, posted an hour ago. The same view James had posted yesterday. I sat in Mom's favorite chair, in the house where she'd raised us, where she'd sacrificed everything to give us a good life, and tried to comprehend how my sister and my husband could do this. Not just the affair, that was bad enough, but to abandon us now, when Mom was dying? To be sipping cocktails in paradise while I planned our mother's funeral alone? The depth of their betrayal was almost as devastating as losing Mom. Almost. Mom's funeral was small and quiet. The chapel was filled with her coworkers, old friends, and neighbors, but the 2 empty seats in the front row spoke volumes. I delivered the eulogy alone, my voice somehow staying steady as I talked about Mom's strength, her sacrifice, her unconditional love. A week later, I was sitting in Mom's kitchen, surrounded by sympathy cards I couldn't bring myself to open, when I heard the front door unlock. Sarah's laugh floated in first, that familiar, carefree sound that now felt like a knife in my chest. Then James's deeper chuckle joined in. They strolled into the kitchen like they were returning from a casual weekend away, both golden-tanned and relaxed. Sarah had a new designer bag. James's wedding ring was gone. Oh good, you're here, Sarah said, as if we were meeting for coffee. We need to talk. James wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist, and I watched my sister lean into my husband's embrace. The casual intimacy of it made my stomach turn. I'm filing for divorce, James announced, pulling a manila envelope from his bag. Sarah and I are getting married. I stared at them, these 2 sun-kissed strangers wearing the faces of people I'd once loved. Without a word, I took the papers and signed them, using the pen Mom had always kept by the phone for writing grocery lists. Great, Sarah clapped her hands. Now, you need to get out of the house. It's mine now. I looked up from the divorce papers. What? Mom always loved me best, Sarah said, examining her manicure. Obviously she left everything to me. I mean, I was her baby. You were just there. God, she probably felt obligated to keep you around. I packed a small bag that night, taking only what I knew was undeniably mine. I couldn't stay in that house with them, watching them play house in the space where Mom had just died. Where she'd fought so hard to live. A week later, my phone rang. It was Mom's notary, Mr. Patterson, inviting me to the official reading of the will. When I arrived at his office, Sarah and James were already there, holding hands and whispering to each other like teenagers. Sarah shot me a triumphant smile. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and began to read. I, Elizabeth Marie Chen, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. I watched Sarah's smile grow wider with each preliminary paragraph. Then Mr. Patterson reached the distributions. To my eldest daughter, Lucy Chen, I leave my house at 1542 Maple Street, and all my savings accounts totaling $400,000. Sarah's smile vanished. What? To my youngest daughter, Sarah Chen, I leave $50,000, with the hope that she will use it wisely. I feel compelled to add that I recently overheard Sarah discussing her anticipation of my death and her plans for all that cash. While this was painful to hear, it only confirmed what I already knew about both my daughters' characters. Sarah's face had turned an ugly shade of red. James was suddenly very interested in his shoes. Additionally, Mr. Patterson continued, I have left a private letter for Lucy. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a single page in Mom's familiar handwriting. My dearest Lucy. You have always been the strongest of us, even when you thought you weren't. You learned early what Sarah never did, that love means showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I'm leaving you everything because I know you'll use it wisely. As for Sarah, I'm leaving her enough to help her if she truly needs it, but not enough to hurt her. If she ever truly changes, truly grows up, you can help her if you choose to. But only if she earns it. All my love, Mom. I had barely finished reading Mom's letter when Sarah's scream echoed off the notary's office walls. This is ridiculous. I'll sue you, Lucy. I'll take half of everything. Mr. Patterson adjusted his glasses calmly. Miss Chen, the will is ironclad. Your mother had it properly witnessed and notarized 3 months ago, shortly after she overheard your conversation about her death. You don't have any grounds for contest. James stood up then, straightening his tie like he was preparing for a business negotiation. Actually, I believe I'm entitled to half of Lucy's inheritance. We were still married when Elizabeth drew up the will, Anne. Mr. Turner, Mr. Patterson interrupted, I've been practicing law in this state for 30 years. Inheritance is not considered marital property here, even if received during marriage. You have no claim to any of it. I watched their faces as it sank in, they'd get nothing but Sarah's $50,000. No house, no savings, no easy path to the luxury lifestyle they'd been dreaming of while Mom was dying. They left, but it wasn't the end. For weeks, James kept trying to contact me. Flowers delivered to my job. Lengthy emails about how he'd found clarity during our separation. Tearful voicemails about second chances. Sarah took a different approach. She alternated between threats of legal action and tearful apologies, depending on the day. I'm your sister, she'd plead in her messages. Family forgives. But Mom had taught me that family means showing up when things are hard. Neither of them had shown up when it mattered most. Through mutual friends, I heard they'd moved in together, playing house with Sarah's $50,000. It lasted exactly 2 months before they imploded. Apparently, Sarah's spending habits and James's controlling nature weren't as compatible as they'd thought. They had a screaming match in a restaurant that ended with Sarah throwing her wine in James's face and him calling her a spoiled brat. I blocked them both on every platform, changed my phone number, and asked my friends not to give me updates anymore. Some stories don't need to be followed to their end. Now, 6 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee from her favorite mug. The house still holds her presence in every corner, but it's not painful anymore. I've repainted some rooms, rearranged furniture, made it mine while keeping the essence of her. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah will ever truly change, ever become someone Mom hoped she could be. The letter said I could help her if she did. But that's not my responsibility anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm focusing on my own healing, my own growth, my own future.